Thank you so much for the floor and the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, dear esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests. First of all, allow me to thank the organizers of this conference, specifically the Chief Director of the Central European Academy, Professor Barzo, the Strategic Director of the Central European Academy, Professor Szilágyi, and also the head of our research group, Professor Pavel Sobčík, for all of their help and attention to detail when it comes to this very important project. So today I have the honor of talking about a topic very much similar to the presenter before me, Professor Barzo, but specifically related to Slovakia. So it is a topic I believe that requires our collective attention to detail and rigorous analysis, demographic challenges and their legal solutions, and again, in my case, as they are specific to the Slovak Republic. So this topic delves very deep into the realm of empirical research and demographic research. So I, as a lawyer, of course, I'm not specialized in demography, so I do hope that that you forgive any missteps along the way, but I do believe it is very important to take a look at the numbers and to take a look at demography as well, to be able to analyze our legal responses and our policy and how do they affect these challenges that we confront. So the demographic landscape of Slovakia, like many other countries in Europe, is undergoing a very profound transition or transformation. And our population in general, we can say, is aging. Birth rates in general are declining, and there is a significant challenge to the traditional notion of family. So we have to turn our focus into what family is, how we can support families, and how can that impact or bring positive demographic change. So first, let's take a look at the demographic landscape of Slovakia. The most important source for demographic data in Slovakia is from the population and housing census in Slovakia. Now, traditionally, censuses are performed in 10-year intervals in Europe and elsewhere in the world as well. Now, when it comes to Slovakia, the first censuses have been conducted in the territory of current Slovakia, even in the Middle Ages. However, the year 1961 is significant because that's the first year we have seen comprehensive census results that we can compare easily to today's census results. So 1961, these past 60 years, is where we have relevant data that we can easily compare across these 60 years. So the 1961 census already surveyed data on population, housings, and households and dwellings. So essentially, after that, as you can see, we have been sticking to pretty much 10-year intervals. The year 1991 is important because it's, after the Velvet Revolution, so after a societal change. However, the results of that survey or that census still remain in the traditional realm, so we don't see the impact of the change so much then. The year 2011 is also important because that is the first time where we historically see, first of all, following the European regulation on housing and censuses, and also it is the first time where the population was able to select from paper and electronic forms. And also for Slovakia it is important because it is the first time where the census sheets have been available in minority languages of the population, which for Slovakia means Hungarian, Ukrainian, Ruthenian, and Romani languages. So not only in the Slovak language, but also minority languages. Now, the last survey that we had, or the last census that we had, was in the year 2021. And in the year 2021 was the first integrated and fully electronic census that we had. So over the past 60 years, as I mentioned, that's the data that I was looking at. We have seen a number of very significant changes in the structure of family households in Slovakia. The most important ones, just to call out a few, again, I don't want to stick so much to numbers and demography, but rather the policy changes. But the most important ones that I would like to call out were a change in the reproductive model, specifically at the end of the 20th century, as I mentioned, due to the Velvet Revolution and the societal changes that it brought about. Now, the number of population, as you see, has been increasing in Slovakia, as well as the number of households. So the number of households compared to 1961, it was 1,100,000, and currently it is over 2.3 million, so it is over 100% relative increase. Now, the structure of these households has also been changing. What does that mean? Full family households have historically been dominant households in Slovakia, and the intensity of full family formation was still very high after the 1980s, and still we can see a prevailing proportion of people choosing to live in marriage. Now, in 1961, full family households accounted for more than 80% of census households. Currently, that number is around 50%. So that is a huge drop if we look at it from that perspective. Now, in the decades following the Second World War, we can say that the orientation towards the traditional family model was still very strong. It was very much prevalent in the population, and it was reflected in the highest proportion of complete families with children. Currently, we see an increase of families without children, and also we see an increase of people or single parent households, and also single person households. So a lot of people deciding to live alone. Now, there were a lot of policies that resulted in, as I mentioned, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, having so many full families. First of all, it was, for example, housing policies. It was a lot easier to obtain housing when you had a full family with children. Currently, that is not the case. And again, as I mentioned, despite the fact that the census in 1991 already took place after the revolution, it was still mirroring a so-called traditional Eastern European reproductive model, and we did not see the impact of the Velvet Revolution yet in the 1991 census. Now, since the beginning of the 1990s, the demographic behavior of the population has been changing for sure, and it has been kind of approaching the Western reproductive model or the Western European reproductive model. We have been experiencing a decline in marriage and fertility, and a decrease in the absolute and also the relative number of complete families with children. Now, when it comes to the family has undergone many transformations, or is undergoing a transformation currently as well. The roles of the family members have been changing, which means the dominant role of the fathers receding, women joining the workforce more, and they are more involved in their professional careers. Also, functions of the family have been changing. A lot of the social and educational function has been with the institutions and not so much with the family currently. So we see that change as well. Schools taking over some of the educational and social roles that the family traditionally had. And of course, the family size as well. We have fewer children, and we don't have, or we see a retreat of multi-generational households. So nevertheless, family still remains a stabilizing societal element in Slovakia. So when it comes to marriages, since 2000, the number of marriages has been fluctuating between approximately 24,000 and 28,000 per year. For the first time, dropping below 30,000 was in the 1994, and we have not been able to achieve that level since. There are a lot of contributing factors. One of them is, marital age is changing. So the average age for marriage for men in Slovakia currently is 34.9 years, and for women is 31.9 years. And if you had the pleasure of listening to Professor Michalski yesterday, you know that this, route to a successful life, let's say in very basic terms, is education, career, marriage, and children. In Slovakia, what we have experiencing is a lot of the times people not taking this viable route, but rather having children, or family formation begins with having children and not marriage. So marriage comes later. So the average age for the first child is lower than the average age for marriage in Slovakia. So that is a little bit of an indicator of what is happening now. Now, divorce is also an important factor, and it's difficult to compare divorce rates across countries because divorce is very highly impacted by national legislation. What are the conditions that allow divorce and how divorce can be legally or how divorce is legally defined. But divorce rates, you could see that also in previous presentations, divorce rates in Slovakia are generally lower than the European standard. They are lower than Hungary and much lower than the Czech Republic and very much close to Poland currently. We have been experiencing a drop in the divorce rates, and controversially, the pandemic has boosted that drop, so there has been less divorces. Of course, contributing factor is that there are less marriages also, so sometimes people decide to live together, cohabitate together, and not necessarily enter into a marital union, even though Slovakia has no legal alternative to marriage, so we do not have partnerships, registered partnerships or cohabitation in a legal sense. Now, when it comes to the birth rates and the number of children born, we can also see the number of children or the birth rate stabilizing. So I think that's a very important call out because a lot of the times we see very scary data, but in fact, when we look at the data in more holistically, we see that the birth rate in the 1960s, in 1961, was 21 births per 1,000 people. Currently is 9.8 births per 1,000 people. And of course, that has fundamentally changed the way population is aging. Now, but in general, currently, if you see the curve in Slovakia, the birth rate has been stabilizing. So it's no longer dropping significantly, it's more or less at the same level. And the development of the fertility rate is mildly increasing. So what does that mean? Essentially, what it means is that in the past 20 years, we have seen a stabilizing force or even an improving trend in Slovakia. When we looked at the data in 2001, that was the lowest point. When it comes to fertility in Slovakia, it was 1.2. Children, and currently we are at 1.59, and that is due to different factors, but indeed it has been mildly raising. Now, the number of children born out of wedlock is a lot lower than the European standard. Currently we are at 37%. Now, when we look at demographic processes and when we look at this transition, we of course have to see that we are in a transitional period. Family is changing, society is changing, but in general, when people talk about the crisis of the traditional family, I think the situation is not that bleak or not that negative, because when we look at demographic data, if we look at them through the glasses of a person from 1960 or from 1980, of course that data sounds very scary and intimidating and how quickly reproductive models have changed. However, if we look at the story, demography should not only look at current levels, it should look at the story holistically and the trends holistically. And I did speak to a few demographists from Slovakia, and all of them essentially agreed on one thing, that significant drop that we experienced at the beginning of the 2000s was not necessarily a significant drop in itself, but because we had two different demographic groups behaving very differently. Women born in the 1950s, 60s, who were having children earlier, already had their offspring by that time, and women who were born in the 1970s, 80s, who decided to postpone having children, were not yet having children. So that's why we see such a low numbers. So that's why the increase is, gradual right now, because we are kind of catching up. Women who were born in the 1980s are having their first children. So that's why we see that increase there. So in fact, while the numbers at first glance might look scary, the situation is not that dire. So we are kind of catching up with deferred motherhood. So essentially, As you can see, in the past 20 years, there has been a lot of stabilization and improvement. And part of that is, as I mentioned, due to demographic factors, and part of that is due to family policies. So the result that we see in the statistical data changing is also because of family-friendly policies that we have implemented in Slovakia. So in the realm of empirical research, a wealth of data underscores the direct correlation between family policies and demographic outcomes. That's, without a doubt, we can see a correlation between family policy and demographic impact. So studies have consistently shown that countries with comprehensive family policies tend to have higher birth rates, tend to have an increased labor force participation of women, and improved overall family well-being. Now, Slovakia has been recognizing the urgency of addressing demographic challenges, so we do have very much family-friendly policies comparable to Hungary, maybe not as complex, but very much comparable. And so what are these policies in Slovakia? Now, in Slovakia, these policies emphasize, first of all, financial support for families and, of course, long-term parental leave. And on the other hand, we have limited capacity in early childhood or early childcare and education facilities. So, in connection with the childbirth and the care of a newborn child, women are entitled to maternity leave for the duration of 34 weeks. And single mothers are entitled to a maternity leave of 37 weeks. So women who are giving birth to more than one child simultaneously are allowed to take 43 weeks. In connection with the care of a newborn child, men are also entitled to parental leave from the birth of the child to the same amount as a woman, provided that they are caring for the newborn child. Now, to encourage the provision of the care of the child, the employer is obliged to provide parents with parental leave upon their request until the day the child turns 3 years old. Now, in case of long-term unfavorable health condition requiring special care, it is until the age of 6 years old. So we can indeed see a generous parental leave in Slovakia. One of the shortcomings that we have been experiencing with our family policies, I am talking before the year 2023, primarily because we have seen a lot of changes happening this year, was vulnerable families and vulnerable children. So children who come from financially vulnerable families. According to Eurostat, 33.9% of persons living in single-parent household in Slovakia were at risk of poverty, serious poverty. And also it is the same for families with more than 3 children or 3 or more children. So this kind of socioeconomic vulnerability was the catalyst for many new family-friendly policies that were adopted in introduced in May of 2022 and started being implemented this year, 2023. This was called the so-called package for families. And this package for families was prepared by the Ministry of Finance. Interestingly, of course, it involves a lot of money, so maybe not that interestingly. However, because it was introduced by the Ministry of Finance, the primary goal when they introduced this package for families was essentially to mitigate the effects of inflation. And then much later, they added also to kind of address demographic decline. So that came as an afterthought, but primarily it was a financial motivation. Now, what was proposed there was 3 areas: an increase in the tax bonus for children, an increase in the child allowance, and the new support for leisure activities for children. So when it comes to the tax bonus, it was a gradual increase from generally, we can say around 40 euros per child per month. It increased to currently up to 150 euros per child per month. The child allowance, essentially, it was also introduced a gradual increase. And what was criticized about that was that the child allowance would be cut into half in case of unexcused absence from school of the child. So a lot of the people took that as potentially discriminating, especially against the Roma minority. So this is essentially why this package also wound up in front of the Constitutional Court. It was the president who vetoed the package due to this potentially discriminatory part of the package. Now, in general, I had a lot more to say, but I heard the gong, so I understand we are getting close to my time here. What else I wanted to say is that there have been a lot of family-friendly policies that have been introduced in the recent years, even beyond the family package. Our labor code, for example, was reformed, introducing paid leave for new fathers, which is in the amount of 14 days of paid leave for every new father, which it's not the employees or the employer's responsibility to pay, but it comes from the health insurance. So every new father is entitled to take some time off, which I think is a wonderful introduction here. Now, these were just some of the legal, and I had some models of how much money goes to each family, but I will introduce that, of course, in the book chapter that I hope you guys will read. Now, as kind of concluding thoughts, I think it's important to note or important to understand that family law is still at the cornerstone of our society, and societal impact is incredibly important to kind of influence or bring about demographic change. The legal frameworks provide stability in society and security for families that is essential for families to flourish. So a very robust family law system is needed in order to tackle issues such as divorce rate, of custody, or child support in a way that prioritizes the best interests of children and the well-being of families. So I think research shows that these policies are invaluable in tackling demographic challenges, and let us remember that our nation's strength is or lies in the strengths of our families. So as we work to develop legal solutions, it is very important to keep this in mind and to keep our commitment to the values that have been defining these countries and this region for generations. So as we continue to delve into legal research and demographic research on the aspects of this issue, let's remain steadfast in our commitment to evidence-based policymaking by fostering an environment where families can thrive and flourish. And finally, thank you for your attention, and may our dedication to sound research and legal policymaking and legal solutions lead us to a more demographic resilient Central Europe. Thank you.